Okay. So we have here Paula and Joan from the Season Center for Grieving Children, and they're here to speak to our families tonight about supporting bereaved siblings in particular. So Paula and Joan, if you want to introduce yourselves and start.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Joan Kennedy. I'm the outreach manager at Season Center for Grieving Children. I've been with the center since 1996, but I'm not going to share my real age anyways. And I've done many various groups at the center, and I'll go into more and talk a little bit about the center and what we do later on. But I have worked with a lot of siblings who have had a sibling die. I've also worked with a lot of families who unfortunately have had a child die. And as well, I have several good friends who have had a child die, as well as family members. And even though I am older, I also recently lost a sibling. Paula, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Paula Coulter. I'm the program services manager at Seasons. And my role really is to oversee the in-house programming that we have. We provide peer-to-peer support groups for kids, teens, young adults who have had a parent or sibling die. And then we also have some adult groups. This year, we've run a caregiver room that's simultaneous to the littles groups, which are the 5 to 12-year-olds. And we also run a group called On Our Own, which are adults who have had a spouse die and they're raising their children on their own. I've been with Seasons in this role for about 1.5 years, but I actually in 2009 came into Seasons after the death of my husband. And my boys were 3 and 6 at the time. So we came through the program, and this is where we got our support and found our space to be vulnerable and open and work through our grief.
Okay, thanks, Paula. So what I'm going to do is we do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to share. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to just do a land acknowledgement, as that is what we usually do with any of the presentations that we have. So Season Center for Grieving Children and all of us here today recognize that we are on Treaty 16 territory. We humbly and respectfully acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe, the Chippewa, and the Anishinaabe peoples who have been stewards of their traditional territories from the beginning. We also acknowledge that today Barrie is the home of many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples from all across Turtle Island. We recognize and honor their ongoing connections to this land where we live and work. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit about Season Center. So Season Center is in Barrie, and our mission is to provide support and education for bereaved children, youth, and caregivers within the diverse communities we serve. And we do that by creating spaces for bereaved children and their caregivers to explore, share, and find support in their grief. So we do in-person and virtual groups, as Paula was mentioned earlier. As I said earlier, we've actually, Season Center has been in Barrie, Ontario since 1995. And we do peer support groups for children, teens, and young adults who are grieving the death of a parent or a sibling. We do have groups ages 5 to 12. The WAM that you see there is actually a What About Me group, and that is for children who have a parent or a sibling with a life-threatening illness. We have a littles group, and that is for children who have had a parent die from either any kind of accident or any kind of illness. And we also have a SIBS group, and that is for children who have had a sibling who has died, and either from any kind of illness or any kind of accident. We also have a group called Child Survivors of Suicide, and another one which is substance-related death, such as referring to the opioid crisis. We also have teen groups, young adult groups, and we also have adult groups. They're either caregivers of our littles, and they meet at the same time as the children do in the center. We also have an empty arms group, which is for parents who have had a child die under the age of 24. And then we also have another group on our own, which is for parents raising children under 18 years of age on their own. Over the years, we've expanded our services, and in 2017, we partnered with Camp Maple Leaf to provide a summer camp called Camp Skiing, which is a 5-night, 6-day camp in the Kawartha Lakes. It's on a beautiful island in the Kawartha Lakes, and we can have up to 80 children at one time with that group. We also have a school program. With our school program, if we do groups in schools, that can also involve children who have had, say, grandparent die, or aunt or uncle as well. And you can see listed there the different kinds of programs that we do have within our school systems. We are in Simcoe County, and we do have partnerships with all the schools that we have in Simcoe County. And the last program that we developed a couple of years ago is a critical incident stress information sessions for children or teens with parents' consent. Obviously, and these sessions are regarding for children or for teens who have maybe been involved or with a critical incident such as a car accident. We have done sessions for teens who have had a sports coach who has died. So we've done a couple of sessions with them. So that's basically what we do at Season Center. Season Center also has a center. We do have different rooms where the kids can work out their grief, such as a volcano room, an arts and crafts room, a games room. When children grieve, they tend to have a lot of energy, and that's something that Paula will go into right now. So Paula, I'm going to put it over to you.
Thank you. So when we think of children's grief and adult grief as well, we know that grief will affect us physically, it will affect us emotionally, our cognitive and as well as our spiritual development. So as kids kind of go through all those developmental stages, we might see different ways that the kiddos will have an understanding as well as react to the grief and loss that occurs in their life. So depending on the age and the maturity, they will have developed different skills and they will have different care needs. So all of those things will impact how they grieve as well. And we know that children communicate differently than adults, so that will also impact how children are going to grieve. So we're going to go through the next couple of slides looking at some of the stages of development. So in terms of psychosocial, so from birth till 2, when we think of a small child, we know that any person from infant onwards will feel the loss of a primary person in their world. When we think of primary, for infants and toddlers, we may think more of a primary caregiver, so that mom or dad. But if that sibling has played a big role in that child's life, that baby is going to miss and ache for the touch, the sight, the smell of that person. And in the grief reactions that they're going to show, typically they're going to be irritable, their energy level might be off, they might be lethargic, sleeplessness, lots of crying. And then ways that you can support that child really is maintain that physical contact, lots of hugs, lots of nurturing, and trying to maintain as much as we can that normal routine for them. Next slide, Joe. The next stage really is those 2 to 5-year-olds, and they're beginning to understand they're missing their person. So that sibling or that parent that was in their life and ever present now, all of a sudden is gone. In the younger years, they may not necessarily have the concrete understanding that that person is not coming back, but as they mature and as their developmental stage goes further, closer to that 5 years, they may have that understanding of the finality of death and that concrete understanding that that person is not coming back. In this age, there are lots of questions that are being asked over and over again. So is daddy coming home? Is sissy coming home? Where are they? What happened? And that constant repetition. You may see some behavior changes. Sometimes there's temper tantrums. There might be some regression. That regression could be, at bedwetting. It could be coming back as baby talk and kind of reverting back into play that they used to do prior. And how do we support that? It's frequent repetition, explaining over and over again until it kind of becomes concrete in their brain. Lots of hugs, comfort, maintaining that consistent routine again is very important for kids. At this age, it's honesty, being able to answer the questions that kiddos will have honestly, but also understanding their level of maturity and their level of understanding. We need to be able to explain things in their terms that they're going to understand. And at this age too, it's also important that we want to label those emotions. And if you're seeing that temper tantrum in that child, it's, do you think maybe you're really angry, or mommy's sad? Are you sad too because you're crying? And being able to really label those emotions for those kiddos so that they have an understanding of why they're acting the way they're acting and why they're feeling the way they feel. The next stage is those 5 to 12-year-olds. So they definitely cognitively and developmentally have a better understanding of death. They know that death is not reversible. Their people are not coming back. In this age, this is where at Season Center, why we have the rooms that we do is because of that increase in physical energy. We talk about kiddos being extremely physical in their grief. Us as adults tend to think and be a lot more passive, or we are withdrawn and kind of mulling and thinking things over. Kids tend to be bursts of energy. We talk a lot about their grief as being in puddles. So they could be in the middle of that puddle, feeling all the feelings, and then all of a sudden, okay, I'm good and I'm off to play. And it's a very quick change around. You might see lots of different behavior changes in your kiddos. Sleep disturbances, so those could be difficulty going to sleep, difficulty staying asleep, nightmares, night terrors. At this stage, they may start to ask for more details around the death. They're also concerned with how others are responding. At this age, it's very important that when children are grieving, they are being shown appropriate ways to grieve. So us as parents or caregivers, it's important that we model appropriate grief for them, so they can learn proper coping, sharing, being really honest in your emotions. Kiddos at this age, somatic complaints, so your body's feeling different, your appetite, body aches, those kind of things, sleep changes for sure. And at this age, the kiddos, their peer group is very important and becoming much more important for them, more so sometimes than their family. And they don't want to be different from their peers. It's hard enough building these new relationships, but all of a sudden to be different because a person in your life has died can kind of set them apart. So that is a big fear for a lot of kiddos, and we see that a lot in our center. How do we support those kids? Symbolic play, telling stories. We want to give them appropriate outlets for that energy, get them in sports, allow them to be physical, those types of things. We want to be honest with them, provide them with peer-to-peer support, labeling the feelings, continuing with that, answering all those questions. Another thing at this age, really, especially surrounding a death and all that happens around a death or an illness, if there's a sibling who's ill, allow them to have some control back in their life. Oftentimes they are told that, okay, we need to do this, we've got to go here, we've got to do this. Allow them to take some control back. And that tends to be very supportive with them, as well as being respectful of the kiddo who says, you know what, I just need to be alone. I want to go in my room. I'm okay, but I need some space, and allow kiddos to have that space on their own. And then that next developmental stage really is 12 and on. And they are much more adult-like in terms of their thinking, their rational, not necessarily, they have a lot of the same cognitive abilities. Obviously, as a 12-year-old, your thinking is not the same as an adult, but they're kind of working that way. They have an understanding, the concrete understanding that death is permanent. But in this age, you will often see acting out. They begin to become much more questioning things, the meaning of life. Their peer group is far more important, and often it's more important than their family life. So this peer group becomes their go-to people to have those tough conversations with. The peers become the confidants. And again, they are very self-conscious about being different. I know for the teens and the littles in our group, so that 5 to 12, being in a space where they are with other kids who have had a sibling or a parent die over and over and over again, the kiddos say, you know what, the best part of coming to Seasons is that I'm not alone, because they see that they are the same as somebody else. And how do we support them? We want to listen. We want to make sure that we're available when they need us. Sometimes there are defensive behaviors that come up with the teens. As long as it's harmless or moderately harmless, we want to make sure that we allow for those defensive behaviors. And sometimes those thoughts and feelings can kind of be mishmashed, contradictory, and that's okay.
Thanks, Paula. Okay, so understanding children's grief when a child is critically ill or sick. And so we're talking about the sibling here, not the child who is ill. For some of the children, they have the loss of their playmate. If there is the child is around their age and they used to play before or after school or on weekends, they don't have that person to play with anymore, or not play with the way they usually do. They have to change the way they play. Also, the loss of the normal routine just in the family itself. I mean, obviously the parents also have to deal with that, but so do the children. Siblings can also feel envious of their caregivers spending more time with the ill child. And even though, I mean, in the groups that I've been in with siblings and the kiddos do talk about it, they understand why parents do need to spend more time with the child who was ill, but they do feel envious about that in some ways. Siblings can also feel overwhelmed by any extra household work or childcare, especially older ones who may need to look after younger siblings if the parents are away, in the hospital with the ill child. And just the whole family's ability to maintain regular, extra things that kids do outside of school, such as baseball or art classes or whatever. All that changes for everybody. It certainly does affect the ill child. It affects the parents, but it also affects the siblings. So understanding a child's grief after the death of their sibling. As Paula had mentioned before about modeling, and it is kind of hard, how a parent grieves will affect how the sibling grieves, how the child grieves. So if parents have a hard time getting out of bed, they're feeling so sad, depressed, which is certainly understandable. Children may also feel like that. Parents may want to get children up to go to school, and the sibling behavior changes totally. They don't want to go to school. Or on the other hand, they maybe want to get out of the house, certainly depending on the age. So there is no, it's either one, it can either be one way or another. Children can also have survivor's guilt and thinking about why did my sibling die? Why wasn't it me? Why didn't I die? Why didn't I get sick and die? That's a thought that can run through their emotions as well. Their behaviors and their emotions change, as Paula had mentioned earlier. So sometimes what happens is a child who may have done really well in school and may all of a sudden may become a C or a D student. Their focus is off, their concentration is off, just like parents, adults can be as well. Children tend to have more energy when they're grieving than adults do. I always used to say it's kind of the kids are hanging from the rafters as we are trying to get off the couch and can't at times. And so I always find that parenting is a difficult job that we do. And when you're grieving or when the child's grieving, it becomes even more difficult. Siblings, I know in the groups that I have done, siblings can express regrets or sadness or remorse about things that they said or did while their sibling was sick, to them or to their parents. And sometimes they, say, oh, I shouldn't have said this, I shouldn't have said that. And that's something that can weigh on their minds as well. Cultural or religious beliefs are also something that can affect how a child grieves, depending on if they understand the religious belief or their cultural belief. And that's something that caregivers need to support kids while they're going through that. Also for children and their role within the family context changes. So if the oldest child happens to die and there's, 3 other children in the family, the middle child now becomes the oldest child, and that different responsibilities come with that as well. And so they have to find what their new position is, what their new normal is within the family. Also, continuing influence of the deceased child in their siblings' life. Just for an example, if the child who died was really into, let's say, baseball and really enjoyed baseball, but the other sibling did not. But all of a sudden they may have an interest now in baseball and want to do that. And that could be their connection to their sibling. That's what they feel they need to do. So how do we support a child after the death of a sibling? So as Paula had mentioned earlier, when we were going through the developmental stages, she had given some ideas on how families can support their child. But also having an active support system for the parents. The parents have had a child die. Personally, I can't imagine anything worse in my life. And that is a monumental task that parents have to deal with as well. And so parenting your children while you're grieving is very difficult. And so you really need to find resources or take family up on offers or friends up on the offers to support you, whether it's bringing you meals or looking after your children, taking them to the park. That is also supporting you, but it's also supporting the siblings. Be aware of the stress that's in the family. Supporting, when a child dies, parents tend to try and look at each other for support at a time when most of you really have a difficult time supporting somebody else because of the grief that you are feeling yourself. And children can also feel that within the family context. So you need to be aware of that. Open communication and chatting with your child about memories, about thoughts, about feelings. This will help you to understand how your child is feeling. And it's okay to talk about them. Sometimes, in the groups that I've been in, the children will say, I don't talk about my brother because it upsets my mom. And downstairs in the caregiver room, mom is saying, I don't talk about my son because I don't want to upset the children. Where in reality, both want to talk about the child that has died, but they don't want to upset each other. Crying's normal. Being upset is normal. That's part of grieving. And if you can do it together, a role model that's okay to do. It's okay to have emotions. It's okay to have feelings. It's what you do with them. And that's part of learning appropriate coping skills, what Paula had talked about earlier. Children will be concerned about their caregivers that I have just mentioned. Also, if for some kids, if they're going away to school, whether they're going away to, say, college, university for the first time, or if they had come home from school and then are going back, they may not want to go back to school, or they may not want to move out of the house because they're afraid that their parents will not be able to take care of themselves. On the other hand, as a parent, you may not want your child to leave the house or go away to school because you may not feel that they'll be able to take care of themselves as well. All that stuff, going away to school and all that is part of a normal process that we do in life. And children can still go away to school if they want to. There are supports out there for children, our teens and young adults, as well as Paula had mentioned earlier. She does do a young adult group, and we do virtual with the young adult group, so they can call and be in a group with other young adults who have had the same situation in their life. Decide as a family what to do with possessions or pictures or other reminders of the sibling who had died. this becomes a little bit challenging in families where you may have family members who want to keep pictures up on the walls and things of the person who died in the room, where other people don't want pictures on the wall. They find it too painful to look at that. So as a family, you need to work that out, whether there's pictures, say in the child's room who wants the pictures up on the wall, and what possessions of the child can siblings have, what do parents want to keep, that kind of thing. Again, that's through open discussion as well. One of the questions that a lot of kids ask, and parents that have attended our Empty Arms group, is when somebody asks you, do you have any brothers or sisters? Do you include your sibling or do you not include your sibling? And I'm going to say from discussions that we have that there really is no right or wrong answer to that, other than how you feel at the time that question's asked. Sometimes, you know, if you say, oh, I have 3 sisters, but one of them has died, then somebody says, oh, what do they do? Where do they live? What do they do? And you may not want to go there. So sometimes people may just say, I have 2 sisters. Sometimes people say, I have 3 sisters, 2 here on earth. And that can be an answer too as well. And or how many children do you have? I know several of my friends who have had children die, they struggle with this too. Sometimes they don't want to go into long explanations. So when they answer it, they don't include the child who's died, but then they feel guilty afterwards about doing that. So another time they may include them, but then you may get people who may ask you more questions. So then of course you need to be prepared for that, or have an answer and just saying, you know, it's I just do not feel like talking about it right now, but thank you for asking. Paula, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. So what does that grieving child need? What they want from us really is to be accepted for who they are and how they are, and they want to be cared for and nurtured. So how can we do that? Time, giving your child the time that they need, being present with them, providing the safety and security in their world. All of a sudden, their world has been shattered because their sibling has died, or their primary caregiver, whoever the person is. And it's going to take a little bit of trust to begin to understand that their world is safe again. You want to reassure them of your love and that you care for them, acknowledge them for the hard work that they do. Grief is really hard. Be proud, champion that child, help them with the skills that they ask for in order to express themselves, let them be their own individual person, model appropriate behavior, appropriate grief. And then that child who is grieving faces a lot of different things as they go along. As they go through those developmental stages, they begin to really understand that their person has died. So they understand that the finality of it, their person is not coming back. And then whatever the family's beliefs are, whether there's an afterlife or heaven or what have you, then that will give them an understanding of where their person is. They want to feel, or we need to be able, the child needs to be able to feel what it feels like to have the person who has died not there with them. So really it's beginning to understand and accept that the person is not coming back. And this could take a lot of time. and a lot of understanding, and being able to recognize and live and love in a world without the person who has died. So we always talk about grief as being, you're going to forever grieve for the person that has died. You're never going to stop the grieving process. Your world is just going to be different, and you've become, you've learned to live with that loss. And this is one of Joan's favorite quotes from Dr. Wendy Harpham. The greatest gift you can give your children is not the protection from change, loss, pain, or stress, but the confidence and tools to cope and grow with all that life has to offer them. So one of the things that we really try to really do at Season Center is really to not only allow them to grieve the loss of their person, but also to be able to learn the coping skills that they need, so that they can grow up to be healthy humans for the rest of their lives.
Okay. So moving forward, I thought, part of, we wanted to go over child development and that, but what we really wanted to do was to leave time for everyone to chat or to ask questions or make comments about questions that people may have. So Stephanie, you've talked about, do you think educating and supporting families and siblings with precipitory grief helps with mitigating complicated grief afterwards? I would say certainly, Stephanie. The one group that we do have at the center is called What About Me, as I said earlier, and that's for people who are children or living with somebody who is life-threatening illness or terminally ill. And when that happens, I'm sure you're aware of, and they're not going to get better, the grief process starts way before then. And that's, you can see some of the symptoms that we talked about with children or siblings being more, maybe acting out more challenging and whatever, and that's part of their grief. And so, yes, I totally agree. There is, I believe you have another speaker in a couple next month who will go into that more, I think, at that time. Yeah.
I asked that, can you hear me? Because I'm outside.
Yes.
Okay, I asked that for two reasons. So I'm a mom of a daughter who is a survivor, but at the time I have another daughter, and going through the process of my daughter going through treatment, after the fact, I realized that my daughter, myself, my entire family was grieving loss after loss. Like, my older daughter lost out on her mom, who wasn't available. She felt very abandoned. I've been dealing with sort of a lot of attachment issues that we've really struggled with to sort of get back. My younger daughter struggled with, losses of, not being able to have birthday parties, like anything, right? And so as a mom, I've wondered often if grief counseling and acknowledgement of the losses that are happening from the moment of diagnosis. So, there's a time period where, as a mom, as a parent, you get the news that your child is sick and you don't want anyone to bother you because everybody in the world is coming to talk to you. But then there's a period where everybody sort of disappears again. Yes. And it's in those quiet moments that you start to think that you're alone and people aren't really there. And it's in those moments where I feel like there's teachable times for families where we can acknowledge that these things happen, so we can mitigate the problems that happen later throughout the process. so I asked that for that reason. And then I'm also back in school for social work, so I can work within this industry. And I'm doing a paper right now on complicated grief and preemptive support, so that we can effectively intervene before children have sort of attachment issues, anxiety, depression, and problems that are so difficult to access support for after the child is done treatment or after the support sort of fall away. And so it's like, my question is twofold. I just, aside from what I've seen you talk about, I don't really know any other programs. I was never approached at Sick Kids about any other programs that did like preemptive sort of grief.
It's called anticipatory grief.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And so, yes, Season Center does have, we don't have a group at the moment. And the only reason why we don't have a group at the moment is we haven't had enough inquiries to have a group. So all our groups that we have at Seasons, when we get enough children for a group, then we do a group. So it's not, and so the What About Me group, we haven't had one for a little while. But I used to do that group all the time. We used to actually get referrals quite a bit from home care.
Yeah.
I guess you can still call it that, where we would have moms who would come. So the group was for the siblings, not the sick child.
Yeah.
So obviously the moms had to have somebody who would look after the sick child while they brought, or the dads, whatever, would bring the other children there. And so this time was for the siblings, but while the siblings were upstairs, and so we do peer support. So we work with volunteers, except there's always a staff member there who our staff are either social workers or mental health nurses or whatever. But then we also have facilitators who are volunteers who happen to be maybe social workers who just want to work, do volunteer work with children. Some of them are high school people in university or college going through a human resources thing and working with the children. So in the What About Me group, we would talk about those different feelings and what it's like for that sibling to not have their parent who used to be their the way their parent used to be, because now their parent is stretched in many directions as well. And so sometimes just for kids to know that there is somebody else in life who's going through what they're going through. And you're right, there's not a lot of places that I'm aware of that do those groups. There are some local hospices who do those groups. I know where we are in Simcoe County, that Season Center tends to do those groups. So the hospices usually send the children to us, we send the adults to them or whatever. But I also have a list of resources that I'm going to pass on that they'll send out to you. And there is online stuff as well. But I really don't know of any other places that do have groups for families or children who are grieving. There's a lot of individual support, but I do know the parents who were in the What About Me caregiver room, and they weren't always cancer. I mean, sometimes it was very rare genetic syndromes, right? And where there was no place to go, like they didn't have the OPACC, things like that as well. So kudos to you for wanting to do that, Stephanie, and the best of luck with that. But I'll send off those resources for other things that you can look at. The you can, I don't, have you ever had any connection with the social workers at Sick Kids?
So I did, and that was sort of why I started the process of going back to school. I just noticed afterwards, right, like going through the process with my daughter being sick, and during that process, she did have friends pass away, and I didn't have any knowledge of how to talk to her about it. I didn't know. It was sort of just, you know, you're in this cancer world and it happens, and your kids are ill and they're noticing this. And now that my head is a little bit more clear, you look back and you're like, wow, like the reality of death must have hit my children, and I didn't see it. I didn't know to talk to them about that. And that is sort of the area that I find so interesting, is that, you know, we're dealing with children that unfortunately are going to die from cancer. We're dealing with families that are losing a lot of things, but we're not talking about those feelings ahead of time. We're waiting until after. And then we're saying, okay, well, here's this resource, here's that resource, but we're not doing anything. We're not supporting the family in the initial. And I think, you know, and that's where, like, afterwards, when I looked at my kids and I said, wow, I wish that I had seen that my protecting of my other daughter was actually hindering her development in grieving effectively. Because you think, you know, I'm not going to take her to these appointments. I don't want her to see this, but she was losing out on so much. And so I just think it's interesting when you sort of flip the narrative and go, okay, how can we prevent this, as opposed to how can we put a Band-Aid on it afterwards? And my heart just aches for parents that have lost children, because that grieving process is so personal, and people do fall off, right? They're there in the initial, but then they're left alone to grieve. And you know what? Do they even? Yeah.
Stephanie, don't beat yourself up.
Oh,
Please
I don't know.
Because if you take yourself and go back to when you're at that time. So I'm sure even if you were a social worker at that time, you were a social worker second or third. You're a grieving mom, first of all, you know, and so all those ideas or those thoughts that you can have now may not have even existed.
No, they wouldn't have been there. I just wish that I had somebody say, hey, like, maybe we could, you know, look at this, and that's why I was just interested in, you know, talking about this anticipatory grief, and just, you know, if it's effective, if it's something you think would be a really beneficial service.
Definitely. And I think for I know with the What About Me group that we do, part of that is to give the SIBs some support and some attention with the benefit of that is a parent has to bring them. So the parent also gets support from other parents who may be at different stages in their, you know, how the child is ill, you know, whether the child's going to get better, the child's not going to get better, whatever. You never want to take that hope away with that, but at least the parents or caregivers can support each other in that time. As well, if you can. Stephanie, do you live in Simcoe County?
No, I'm down. I'm down in Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Scarborough, like Pickering area.
Okay. Yes. So I'm just thinking, if you're going to go this way, that this may be something that you also may want to look at placements. You know, and doing that. And so you may want to look at different hospices around your areas to see if they do have those kind of groups. Because you would probably be an awesome facilitator.
Well, thank you.
Thank
you. Well, I just, you know, I'm coming at it twofold, and I know I've talked to a lot of parents who have kids that are still, you know, fighting, and parents that have lost children, and parents who are just starting, you know, this journey now. And there just seems to be sort of this overarching need for just sort of the interventions to happen earlier and then to be consistent all the way through from diagnosis to, unfortunately, if it is a death. And as a mom,
oh, sorry. Were you ever gonna, I know there's something called the PACT team at Sick Kids, which is when a child, and Michelle, maybe because Michelle's our parent liaison, she works at Sick Kids. It's a PACT, and they do help support families whose child will unfortunately be dying. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Yes, no, I have. I'm trying to think of the name of the nurse, Lori. Michelle, do you know? Do you know who?
So I don't.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
hi. So I don't have the exact name, but the PAC team would be a really good start. And like Sarai had said, they actually do that. Like, they're very good at really taking the family step by step. And that is a discussion that they actually do have with families, because I think it's something that is to possibly prepare for, unfortunately. And I think, it is, being in this cancer world that we're all tied into, I think, at some point, that's a thought that we all have. It's a thought that crosses our mind. And I think it isn't talked about as much as it should be. But the PAC team does actually do that and does actually sit down and have those conversations with the families.
Like with supporting them in anticipation of their passing.
Anticipation, yes.
Passing, yeah. So I don't know, Stephanie, if you know of any families that are in need of that service, maybe connect them with Michelle or Susan, our parent liaisons, I know they did a presentation for OPAC maybe like a year ago or something. Dr. Rappaport, that's the name that comes to mind. He kind of heads that's like childrensgrief.ca, something like they're kind of involved in that. So maybe if you have any questions or know families that need that help.
Yeah. I can forward the nurse's name and her email address to you, and then if you want to forward it, that may be helpful as well.
I was really happy to see that OPAC was offering this. I've never seen, all through like my daughter's treatment, I don't remember seeing anything about bereavement, but then I might have not been receptive to it because I was in the thick of it as well. So I was really happy to see that. And I'm actually taking a course right now on children's interpretation of death and dying. And it's very much everything that sort of was said here has been reiterated in my classroom. And so when I saw this, I was like, this is great to see that people are talking about it now. And if it wasn't, maybe people are a little bit more receptive to be discussing it, which I think is very important.
It's very important, Stephanie, and we did it because we know, and we've heard from a lot of families over the years that once their child passes away, they're kind of forgotten. But even the healthcare, like everybody who's there, they just drop away, as you mentioned. So we want to make sure that we support all our families, even bereaved ones, right, Michelle? So it's important. We did a talk a couple months ago with another group that supports bereaved parents and grieving parents, and that's always top of mind for us to help them too.
Yeah, so. The siblings is always because of my other daughter, and just seeing after sort of like, they are very forgotten from beginning to end. Again, not intentionally, and it's always been where my heart went, is with the siblings, because it's that sort of the untapped demographic within a family where there's a lot of struggle and not a lot of support. So I was so happy.
They're the forgotten, as we say. So
And Stephanie, you had talked to about the secondary losses.
Yeah.
And that's hugely important to, yes, there in a lot of instances, there's a death of a person, but there's all the other things that kind of cascade that follow behind that death and that loss of that person, and being able to validate that as well is hugely important.
Mhm.
Thank you. I did have a question on behalf of another family that I remember they were on our other presentation about supporting grieving families, and mom was asking about her son, and I mentioned before we started a presentation to you. Her son's a teenager, he's going off to university soon, and his sister passed away maybe a year or two ago, fairly recently, and he doesn't want to reach out for help. And mom is kind of concerned about once he's on his own off at university, how will he cope? How will he get support? Like, what resources there are? If he doesn't want to do a support group, he doesn't want, help. What do you do in that case for an older teen?
Yeah, that is because they can make their own decisions. Sometimes that can be difficult. One of my suggestions would be for the mom to research resources that are available at the university, so that if he does need to talk, and that she can just give him the resources, email them, whatever, to him, so he does have them, and just suggest to him, if there's anything, she doesn't have just to say about grief around the sister, but just, even the challenges of moving away from home. And even though we may be very excited about it, then they get out there and then they realize all this other responsibility that they have, and then, but at least mom would know that he has knowledge, whether he reaches out. I don't, that's something that she's going to have to keep the lines of communication open.
Yeah, I
with
guess
him.
it's important not to push them, but when they're ready. And I know most universities have some kind of counselors, or also just peer group clubs or organizations that support each other for grieving kids, right? So.
And another suggestion would be to look at not just at the university, but the community around the university, in case he doesn't want to talk to anybody in the university, that he has some resources from the community as well.
Good idea.
And then, she just will need to, when she's calling, talking with him and asking how he's doing, but not overly, because you don't want him, with teens or young adults, sometimes the more you talk about or push them, the way they move farther back. So you have to kind of look at how to do that as well.
Okay, thanks. I had just one other question too about, you mentioned, what's normal, grieving, healthy coping. So what are warning signs for unhealthy grieving and, not normal coping, going into depression and such? Like, what are some warning signs of that?
I would say going into depression, not getting out of bed, or withdrawing from friends, because usually with teens or young adults, I mean, their peers are the most important to them. So withdrawing from them as well, withdrawing from things that they like to do, any of the activities that they like to do, or the fact of them not coming home. So being out till all hours of the night, or weekend or whatever, and not calling to see where they are. Always, of course, then you also have to look at whether there's increased use with alcohol or drugs, whatever. Those are all warning signs. Talking about life's not worth living, what's the meaning of life, that kind of things. Talking about suicide, those are also really things that you need to address.
And in younger
Paula?
children? Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to ask Paula if she can think of anything else.
Distinct changes in behavior, I think, would be
Yeah.
another one too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And you had mentioned that your programs are not just for Barrie, but you have some virtual programs that anyone in Ontario can join?
So.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, currently,
Ontario, wherever. Go ahead, Paula.
we had a littles group this year. We had a teen group. I facilitate a young adult group, which this young man for heading off to university would fit into. I also do a virtual on our own group. And because they're virtual, we need to make sure that we've got enough participants to make a group, which is about 5. So if we've got 5 people who are willing and kind of fit in that one particular group, then we'll have it. And I know in, I think in the teen group, I've got somebody as far away as Ottawa.
And the groups are generally, our groups are in the evening. And there's different nights. So, you know, if we have enough teens for 4 groups, then we have 4 groups for teens. And there's a maximum of 10 in a group, generally, going for there. So we try not to have waiting lists. If we get more kids, then we just put them in more groups.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michelle and Stephanie. Any other questions before we go?
I'm okay. Thank you so much, Paula and Joan, for taking the time to present to OPAC and our families. I know, like Soraya had said, you know, we get a lot of questions when it comes to bereavement, and we want to make sure that, you know, just as we support the families, that the bereaved families are getting that same support. I think one of the things that we hear often is them not knowing where they fit in anymore in this journey. You know, so the support is so heavily surrounding them when they're very much in it, and now they almost feel like, okay, everyone's kind of done with us now, and we're kind of on our own. And that's so not the case at all, and we want them to know that. So, you know, taking the time to present and specifically talk about grief, which I think is a very difficult thing to do, but even, I think even more important at times to do, you know, to help support families who unfortunately go through this different stage in this journey, I think is just as important. So thank you for this.
Yes, thank you. It's so important for the sibling support, for bereaved family support, which is what you're doing. Thank you for all your wonderful programs. And your website is grievingchildren.com. If you want more resources, I know, Joan, you said you had some handouts or resources that you'll email to me, and then I'll forward them on to our attendees, anybody who registered for tonight, and anybody else who sees our presentation here recording, which will be on our YouTube channel soon. Anybody who wants those, I'll forward it to them. And yeah, and of course, OPAC is here to support families virtually and in hospital. opacc.org, that's our website, so you can see all our programs there. And yeah, so thank you again for everybody who joined us tonight, and for Paula and Joan especially for talking and all the good work you do. Thank you. Good night.
Well, thank you for inviting us.
Good night.
Appreciate that. Take care. Do some self-care.